Picture yourself standing on a cold, windswept plain in southern England. The year is somewhere around 2500 BC. In front of you, rising out of the chalky earth like the bones of some colossal, extinct beast, is a construction site that will one day baffle the entire modern world. You are looking at the birth of Stonehenge. Now, when most of us picture this iconic monument, our minds immediately go to those massive, iconic pillars, the ones standing tall with heavy lintels resting across their tops. Those are called the sarsens. And yes, they are absolute monsters. Some of them weigh up to 25 tons, which is roughly the weight of 4 adult elephants. But while the sarsens get all the glory on the postcards, they aren't actually the most baffling part of the Stonehenge mystery. Because those giant sarsens, they were dragged from the Marlborough Downs, which is only about 20 miles away. Don't get me wrong. Moving a 25-ton rock 20 miles without a semi-truck is a fantastic achievement, but it's a local achievement. To find the real mystery, the puzzle that has kept archaeologists awake at night for over a century, you have to look past the giant outer ring. You have to look at the smaller stones nestled inside, forming an inner horseshoe. These are known as the bluestones. They are called bluestones because when they get wet from the famously unpredictable British rain, they take on a faint, bluish-gray hue. Compared to the sarsens, they look almost modest. But let's be clear about what modest means in the Stone Age. Each of these bluestones weighs between 2 and 4 tons. That is the size and weight of a modern SUV. And there weren't just a few of them. The original design of Stonehenge called for about 80 of these heavy, unyielding blocks of rock. If you have ever been roped into helping a friend move a sleeper sofa up a flight of stairs, you know that humans and heavy objects are a terrible combination. So, imagine moving 80 stone SUVs. But here is the kicker. The detail that turns this from a difficult prehistoric chore into one of the greatest engineering mysteries in human history. These bluestones are not local. Geologists have chemically analyzed these rocks and traced them back to their exact bedrock of origin. They didn't come from a quarry down the road. They didn't even come from the same region. They came from the Preseli Hills in Pembrokeshire, Wales. If you were to draw a straight line on a map from the Preseli Hills to the Salisbury Plain where Stonehenge sits, you are looking at a distance of about 140 miles. And of course, ancient humans weren't walking in a perfectly straight line through thick forests, deep valleys, and winding rivers. The actual route they had to take would have been much, much longer. We are talking about dragging 82-ton rocks across hundreds of miles of untamed, prehistoric British landscape. And remember the tools they had at their disposal. This was the Neolithic period, the late Stone Age. There were no cranes. There were no pulleys. There were no paved roads. The wheel hadn't even been invented yet. Or at least, it hadn't made its way to Britain. And they didn't even have metal tools to perfectly carve out tracks or sleds. Just stone axes, bone tools, woven ropes made from plant fibers, and raw, calloused human hands. How do you organize a society to undertake a commute from hell that would likely take months, if not years, for a single stone? Why would you even want to? For decades, some scientists looked at the sheer, mathematical improbability of this feat and decided that humans simply couldn't have done it. They looked for a force of nature powerful enough to do the heavy lifting for them. But as we're about to see, nature is rarely that accommodating, and human determination is much, much stranger than we ever gave it credit for. For a long time, the most popular explanation was what you might call the glacial cop-out. The theory went like this. Tens of thousands of years ago, during the last ice age, a gargantuan sheet of ice bulldozed its way across the Welsh landscape. It ripped these bluestones right out of the hills, carried them in its frozen belly for 100 miles, and then, as the planet warmed, the ice melted. It essentially acted like a giant prehistoric dump truck, leaving the stones conveniently scattered around the Salisbury Plain, just waiting for someone to pick them up. It is a neat and tidy explanation. It takes the pressure right off our ancient ancestors. But modern geologists have completely ruined the party. You see, when a glacier moves rocks, it leaves a messy, predictable trail of debris known as glacial erratics. Basically, random boulders dropped by the melting ice as it retreats. There is absolutely no trail of Welsh bluestones leading to Stonehenge. Worse still, the geology of the ocean floor tells us the ice sheets of the last ice age simply didn't flow in that direction. Nature didn't deliver these stones on a silver platter. The builders had to go and get them. So, we are back to the grinding reality of human muscle. How do you move an impossibly heavy slab of rock across the rugged, heavily forested terrain of ancient Britain? The most prominent theory for decades has been the land route. Picture a heavy-duty wooden sledge, crafted from massive oak tree trunks, with the bluestones securely lashed to the top, using thick ropes made of twisted bark and animal sinew. But you can't just drop a heavy wooden sled onto the dirt and pull. That's like trying to drag a refrigerator across a shag carpet. The friction of the earth would stop you dead in your tracks. To overcome this, the builders would have needed to create a continuous wooden highway. Some experts suggest they laid down a track of wooden rollers, essentially a series of perfectly stripped logs laid side by side. As the sledge rolled forward over the logs, a team at the back would quickly pick up the freed logs, run them up to the front, and lay them down again in the mud, over and over, for miles on end. Other archaeologists argue for a greased track. Instead of rolling logs, they laid down long wooden rails, smeared heavily with animal fat. It sounds incredibly gross, but animal fat is a fantastic ancient lubricant. Now, think about the human engine required for this. Modern experiments trying to replicate this feat have shown that it takes roughly 40 to 60 strong adults pulling on thick ropes to move a single 2-ton stone on a greased track. But this isn't a casual stroll. You can't just have 60 people tugging whenever they feel like it. If one side pulls harder than the other, the sledge slips off the rails. It requires absolute, perfect synchronization. Think of an Olympic rowing team, moving flawlessly to a single beat. It's entirely possible they use chants, songs, or the pounding of bone drums to keep the rhythm. 1, 2, heave. 1, 2, heave. Now imagine doing that uphill, through dense Neolithic swamps, in the freezing, sideways British rain. And it isn't just about the people pulling the ropes. Think about the hidden logistics. Those 60 haulers are burning thousands of calories every single day. Who is feeding them? You would need a whole secondary army of hunters, gatherers, and cooks following alongside, essentially functioning as a mobile catering company for this extreme stone-hauling road trip. You also need woodcutters, constantly hacking down trees to replace broken sledge runners and rails. When you calculate the mind-numbing effort of cutting down thousands of trees for tracks, hunting enough food to feed the hauling teams, and the agonizingly slow pace of dragging 80 individual stones over dry land, you start to wonder if there was a better way. The builders must have looked at the dense, unforgiving forests and the muddy, uneven ground and thought about the coastline. What if they just skipped the land route altogether? What if they took these massive rocks to the sea? To a Neolithic Britain, the ocean wasn't a barrier. It was a prehistoric superhighway. When you put a heavy object on water, you instantly eliminate your biggest enemy, ground friction. Suddenly, you don't need 60 people burning thousands of calories on greased logs just to move a few miles. You just need a vessel, some paddles, and a deep understanding of the tides. But how exactly do you float a rock the weight of a rhinoceros? They certainly didn't have massive wooden galleons or cargo ships. The cutting-edge nautical technology of the day was the dugout canoe, essentially a massive single tree trunk that had been laboriously hollowed out using fire and stone axes. Now, if you try to put a 2-ton stone in a single canoe, it will immediately capsize and sink. But if you take 2 large dugout canoes and lash them together side by side, laying a sturdy wooden deck across the middle, you create a prehistoric catamaran. Suddenly, you have a highly stable, wide platform. You carefully inch the massive bluestone onto the wooden deck, making absolutely sure it sits perfectly in the center. If it is off by even a few inches, the center of gravity shifts, the boats list to one side, and the whole contraption goes under. The proposed sea route would have involved loading the stones on the coast of Wales, paddling out into the open water, navigating into the Bristol Channel, and eventually hooking into a network of inland rivers to get as close to the Salisbury Plain as possible. It sounds incredibly efficient on paper, Let the water do the work. But this route hides a terrifying reality. The Bristol Channel is not a calm, lazy river. It boasts the second highest tidal range on the entire planet. The water level can rise and fall by nearly 50 feet in a single day. When that tide rushes in or out, it creates violent, swirling currents, vicious undertows, and treacherous waves. Imagine trying to steer a heavy, clunky wooden catamaran, carrying a literal mountain of solid rock, while the ocean actively tries to pull you under. If a rope snaps, or a freak wave hits the broadside of the vessel, it is game over. There is no saving it. Months of grueling labor, quarrying the stone, carving the boats, hauling the rock to the shore, would vanish to the bottom of the sea in 3 seconds. And we know exactly how dangerous this was, because in the year 2000, a group of very brave, very optimistic volunteers decided to test this exact water route theory. They built a Neolithic-style boat, lashed a 3-ton Welsh bluestone to the deck, and set off into the waters of the Bristol Channel to see if they could recreate the ancient voyage. It took exactly one rough wave. The ropes groaned, the boat violently tipped, and the multi-ton stone plunged straight into the freezing depths, where it still sits today. Nature 1, modern humans 0. Now, does that mean our ancestors didn't use boats? Not necessarily. Prehistoric sailors were likely far more skilled at reading the sea and anticipating the violent tides than a crew of modern volunteers. They might have hugged the coastline, waiting patiently for days or weeks for the perfect window of calm weather, creeping along inch by inch. Or maybe they used a hybrid method, dragging the stones over land where it was flat, and using short, careful river crossings only when absolutely necessary. But whether they braved the violent tides of the sea or dragged those sledges through miles of agonizing rain-soaked mud, we are left staring at the same glaring, inescapable question. Why? Britain is literally covered in rocks. There is perfectly good stone all around the Salisbury Plain. If you just wanted to build a giant monument, you could use the materials sitting right in your own backyard. So why subject yourself to the absolute nightmare of transporting these specific 80 bluestones from 140 miles away? What was so magical about the Preseli Hills in Wales that it justified this monumental amount of human suffering and risk? The answer to that question remained a stubborn mystery for thousands of years, until a very recent, jaw-dropping archaeological discovery proved that everything we thought we knew about the origins of Stonehenge was completely backward. For decades, we assumed the builders of Stonehenge went to Wales simply to quarry fresh rock. But when an archaeological team began digging around a desolate, windswept site in the Preseli Hills called Waun, they didn't find a quarry. They found a ghost circle. The team uncovered a series of empty stone holes, proving that a massive stone monument used to stand right there on the Welsh hillside. And then they found the smoking gun. One of the empty pits in the earth had a very distinct pentagonal shape. When they compared its dimensions to the stones sitting on the Salisbury Plain today, it was an exact, puzzle piece match for the base of one of the Stonehenge Bluestones. Furthermore, the diameter of this ruined Welsh circle perfectly matched the diameter of the outer ditch at Stonehenge. The builders didn't just go to Wales to mine rocks. They went there to dismantle a pre-existing sacred monument and drag it, piece by piece, across the country. But why? The prevailing theory is that these were what we call ancestor stones. In Neolithic culture, stones were often heavily associated with the dead and the eternal, while wood was associated with the living. As these ancient tribes migrated eastward across Britain, they couldn't bear to leave their ancestors, their history, and their very identity behind. So, they packed up their most sacred temple and took it with them. Picture the prehistoric equivalent of physically picking up a massive cathedral, dismantling it, and dragging it into the next state to rebuild it. It turned Stonehenge from a mere pile of rocks into a massive, second-hand monument of memory. This discovery neatly wrapped up the mystery. We knew where the stones came from, and we finally had a beautifully human theory as to why they were moved. The book on Stonehenge was practically closed. And then, August of 2024 arrived, and the scientific community was hit with a plot twist so massive it completely shattered everything we had just figured out. At the very heart of Stonehenge, lying flat and mostly buried beneath two fallen giants, is a huge, grayish-green block known as the altar stone. Because it sits right in the middle of the monument, nestled among the other imported rocks, everyone for the past century assumed it was just the biggest, baddest Welsh bluestone of the bunch. It weighs over 6 tons, making it significantly heavier than the other stones brought in from the outside. But recently, researchers decided to analyze the tiny microscopic zircon crystals trapped inside this central stone to read its chemical fingerprint. When the results came back, the scientists were stunned. The fingerprint didn't match the geology of Wales. In fact, it didn't match anywhere in England. The altar stone is made of old red sandstone, and its chemical makeup points to one highly specific place, the Orcadian Basin, located at the absolute northeastern tip of Scotland. Let that sink in for a second. We just spent all this time agonizing over how ancient people managed to move 2-ton rocks 140 miles. The 6-ton altar stone came from over 450 miles away. That is roughly 750 kilometers. It is literally as far away from Stonehenge as you can possibly get, while still remaining on the British mainland. This wasn't just a tough regional commute anymore. This was a continental odyssey. If dragging a stone from Wales was a nightmare, hauling a 6-ton monolith from the tip of Scotland through the dense, mountainous, untamed terrain of ancient Britain is almost physically unimaginable. This shocking revelation has completely flipped the script. It has led many experts to double down on the sea route theory, arguing that the only physically viable way to transport a stone of that immense size from Scotland to southern England was to load it onto a vessel and sail it down the entire coastline of Britain. But whether it came by land, by sea, or some brutal combination of both, the Scottish origin of the altar stone blows the lid off everything we thought we knew about the Stone Age. It means that 5,000 years ago, prehistoric Britain wasn't just a collection of isolated tribes huddled in the mud. It means they were part of a vast, interconnected network. To move a 6-ton monolith from the rugged shores of Scotland all the way to southern England, you need more than just thick ropes and sturdy boats. You need diplomacy. You need safe passage through dozens, maybe hundreds, of different territorial boundaries. You need shared languages, or at least powerfully shared beliefs, to convince the people you meet along the way to feed your exhausted workers, replace your shattered timber, and maybe even lend their own muscles to the grueling labor. The Scottish origin of the altar stone proves that Neolithic Britain was not a fractured wasteland, but a complex, thriving society bound together by a massive, country-spanning vision. They weren't just blindly surviving the elements. They were communicating, collaborating, and dreaming on a scale that is genuinely hard to wrap our modern minds around. Today, we look at things like the International Space Station, the global internet, or particle accelerators as the absolute peak of human cooperation. We like to think we invented the concept of the mega project, but that profoundly human drive to unite and build something larger than ourselves, to push the absolute boundaries of what is physically possible just to reach for the divine, didn't start in a pristine modern laboratory. It started over 5 millennia ago, fueled by nothing but calloused hands, freezing coastal winds, and a 6-ton piece of Scottish sandstone. It is a testament to the beautiful, irrational stubbornness of the human spirit. So, the next time you see a picture of Stonehenge, or if you are lucky enough to stand before it in person, try not to see just a static pile of weathered gray rocks. See the invisible highway of sweat and determination that stretches all the way to Wales and up to the tip of Scotland. See the hollowed-out logboats fighting the violent tides of the Bristol Channel. See the ghosts of ancient people who loved their history so much they refused to leave their ancestors behind. And it leaves us with one final, haunting question. As a society today, what impossible monument are we building right now that will leave the humans of the year 7000 staring in absolute, baffled disbelief? If this deep dive into our ancient past changed the way you look at human history, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel reach more curious minds. Drop a comment down below and tell me, how do you think they moved the altar stone? Are you team land route, team sea route, or something else entirely? Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss out on our next journey into the mysteries of the past. Thanks for exploring with me. and I'll see you in the next one.